Hello, everybody. This is Zeus Caraval from ZK Research, and I'm back for week 9, real-time recorded, and I'm here with my good friend Dave Michaels. And Dave, I noticed you pulled out the retro Zhang shirt there, huh?
You know, I have a historical archives of the communications industry in my closet.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing more of those then. Zang it. So, anyways, this week was a Microsoft Ignite week, right? So this is typically a pretty big week in the world of communications. I know in the past we enjoyed certainly going to this event, but it was virtual. There was lots of news across a lot of different Microsoft products. We'll focus on Teams. I did think Satch's keynote was kind of interesting, though, where he sort of poked at Amazon a little bit without specifically naming Amazon, where he said businesses don't want to do companies where they sell you products on one side and then they compete with you on the other. But given the relative share of AWS to Ignite or to Azure, I think he's probably wrong there. Anyway, so we'll focus on the Teams aspect. There was a lot of Teams news. They actually made a number of updates. I thought a lot of it was kind of catch-up stuff, right? If you look at presenter mode, gallery mode, things like that, those are all things different vendors have. Even the Teams Connect that makes connecting with outside firms easier is something that's already found in Slack and Cisco WebEx. There were a couple of unique things like their PowerPoint Live. Actually, I thought was kind of clever because typically when you present live PowerPoint, you see notes and stuff like that. I'm not sure how big a deal it is when you present virtual because I can keep the notes up on a separate screen if I want to, but it is nice to have it all embedded into one. It was good to see the updates to Teams. I think it's becoming certainly a little bit better a product. I don't think anyone's going to say it's a best-in-class product. And I still think there are some issues, right? The whole way to do guest access is still kind of kludgy. If you're a guest of multiple companies, requires you to do lots of sign-in, sign-outs. I still find the WebRTC version of it horrifically slow. I use that more so than I use the client. And I noticed the other day, even when people were switching between videos, it was taking a long time. So there are some core things I'd like to see them fix, but some of these whiz-bang features and stuff are certainly necessary, and I'm glad to see they did that. So my take on this is Microsoft, since they got into communication, has been and continues to be a fast follower. And given the relative size and the install base they have of Office and the way they do their licensing, that strategy probably works for them best. So what were your thoughts around Ignite?
I was pleasantly surprised, I would say, because I went through the analyst pre-briefing and there was, this much news. And then when the actual event comes around, there was about that much news. So I was pleasantly surprised that there was more going on than I thought. Teams is very central to their cloud delivered vision for Microsoft 365, and just a lot of announcements. As you said, a lot of them were gap filling announcements. Some of them were pretty significant. Some of them were kind of confusing. I think the shared channels is a little confusing. It's interesting that Slack had shared channels and Slack got acquired by Salesforce, and a big thing of Teams was we have shared channels and we're integrating tighter with Dynamics. So very competitive services clearly. The shared channels, it's in pre-release. It's kind of hard to tell what's going on. I'm curious to see how well that's implemented because Microsoft's architecture is very much designed for internal audience, internal single instance customer. And as you do the shared channels, you've got issues with OneDrive versus SharePoint. I think it's mostly geared around chat, so it'll be weird to see. It'll be interesting to see how they do content. It'll be interesting to see how they do other features of Teams because Teams is actually pretty robust. I think one of the more interesting announcements actually was the Operator Connect. Direct routing has been a huge success for Teams. A lot of providers are now supporting that. I think every time a UCaaS provider enables direct routing, I think a little bit of them dies. But I think that the Operator Connect is a new version of that. The main difference with Operator Connect over direct routing is who owns and manages and pays for the SBC. In direct routing, Microsoft does that. And in the new Operator Connect, it's the provider that provides that. And so it's probably going to be a little less expensive. And it'll be an interesting experiment how that works. I was really surprised and excited actually about the new SIP phone gateway announcement. We heard about this last August. I mean, in my opinion, Microsoft's had a little bit of a a light offering when it comes to IP phones. They've got pretty expensive high-end phones. They wanted to go their own phones. They had to get partners to make them, and I don't think Microsoft thought that people wanted to buy phones. Turned out people did want to buy phones. They wanted to reuse phones, and so they finally announced last August that they would support old traditional SIP phones, which would really lower the cost of migration. And I think there were people pretty excited about that, but then we never heard about it again. And so that's been announced. It'll support PolySIP and some other SIP phones, addresses the low-end gap. People could reuse the phones. And so I think that's all around a great move. You mentioned the presentation view in Teams. This is tricky because, in the applications like PowerPoint, presenters like the presenter view, I know I do. You get a preview of the next slide. You can see your notes. And so how do you do that in a conferencing app? Because that's really kind of up to the presentation app to do that. Well, they came up with some ideas on how to improve presentation mode. I'd like to see other meeting applications kind of adopt similar things. I really want to see, we do meetings together all the time, a clock. Presenters need clocks. Yeah. And I haven't seen that pop up yet, a clock that isn't shared, pop-up clock that isn't broadcast to everybody else. And they actually have a great feature, which I haven't seen for a while. They have a feature where the viewers can control the deck and look ahead and look backwards. The first time and only time I've ever seen that feature, actually, if you remember this, was in RadVision. RadVision had, that was one of the breakout features, and I thought it was really brilliant that they had done that. With the way RadVision did it, you could only go back. You couldn't go forward. You could go back of the deck. But I just never seen that feature implemented anywhere else. And of course, Avaya acquired RadVision. And so a lot of good stuff out of Ignite. But I think we've covered it to death. So let's move on.
Also, Dave, I think we should cover Zoom earnings. Now, they were last week, but we skipped last week, so let's cover them this week. They had a really, really good quarter. I know some of the equity analysts I talked to were a bit surprised. I think there's a bit of fear out there as to what's going to happen with Zoom in this whole category once people start going back to work, right? We got vaccines being rolled out now. I do think that we'll continue to use these tools even when we are back to work. The one wild card might be, higher ed and K-12 and things like that, because clearly when they're back in class, they're all back in class, right? There's going to be no hybrid schooling. But I do think.
But will they cancel their subscriptions? Is the question.
Yeah, well, that's the question. I think you will see some attrition there, but for the most part, I think they're, Zoom's still pretty solid. They're the class of the market. They become the market. When people say let's do a Zoom, sometimes it's not even Zoom. The company smashed its numbers, though. If you look, they posted 882 million this quarter. They did 882 million this quarter versus 812 with what the street was expecting. They put up a $902 million guide for next quarter, and which I think will be their first $900 million quarter. And they also got it to 3.8 billion for fiscal year 22. And so, who would have thought a couple years ago that Zoom would be an almost $4 billion company at this time? The stock, admittedly, is expensive, though. If you look at these numbers, they're trading at about 28 times fiscal year 22 revenues. But there is a pretty strong emotional attachment to Zoom, and I think if you look, the attach rate of Zoom Phone has been very strong. I think they're going to get a pretty good ARPU kick there. It's questionable how many are actually sold versus how many they've kind of bundled in, but people are taking that attach rate, and so that gives them a little bit more of a lock-in. One of the questions I get from investors all the time is, what is Zoom going to do with this big war chest of cash they have and this massive market cap? The one thing that keeps coming up is, should they move into contact center? I can tell you from my conversation with Eric Yuan, their CEO, he says we are laser focused on Zoom Phone. We're going to do that right before we look at anything else. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if they were to pluck off one of the smaller ones like Unifor, UJet, something like that. So what were your thoughts on the quarter?
It's interesting about the contact center rumor. I think that mostly came out of a post on the information. I wrote about this in my insider report. The post in the information speculated that Zoom was looking at acquiring a contact center. It didn't have any information. It was just kind of a rumor, it's just speculating. And so I got a lot of calls. I saw some other articles appear about the same subject. And my reaction is, of course they're looking at it. I mean, it's like, that's not news. I mean, and so of course they're looking at it. Whether what they do or not, who knows? And when they do it, who knows? They've already got several partnerships in contact, Five9 and Genesis. But yeah, I could see them moving into their own contact center offer at some point and possibly acquiring one of those. Somebody asked me if they could acquire one of those, and I said they could acquire anybody they want, probably other than Amazon. I mean, so everybody in that contact center space is up for grabs as far as I'm concerned. I agree with you that they are probably more likely. I mean, Eric's MO is to build, not buy, and if they were to buy, I think they'd buy a small company. Edify makes sense. You mentioned UJet. Some of these smaller companies makes more sense to me. Okay, so you've covered the numbers pretty well, so I'm just going to throw in here that it's the same old story. UCAS company or meeting company announces their results, blows away expectations, and great fanfare, and everyone takes a bow. I do love to see a company do well, and they deserve credit for doing well. And I hate to rain on their parade, but if you're not doing well right now in enterprise communications, there's something wrong. We've been seeing, results after results, Ring, Avaya, Five9, every one of them blowing away expectations. I guess we should talk about these expectations. Maybe that's what's wrong. But my feeling is the market is a bit in a bubble right now. Everyone seems to be very excited. As awful as the pandemic has been, let's party like it's 1999. I'm a little suspicious. I'm a little uneasy about the way the market's going right now. And so, I hope everybody does well. And but I'm not expecting this trajectory to continue much longer.
Yeah, but not everybody's done well. If you look at 8x8, hadn't really had a good quarter until Dave Sipes got in there. Vonage just recently started turning that business around. So it has been, there is a bubble, admittedly, but it has been kind of a chosen few. But now you're starting to see some better execution out of some of the smaller companies. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see how long this lasts. But we're still not through the vaccine phase. So who knows?
So for our next story, we're going to talk about T-Mobile's announcement. I saw T-Mobile tweeting they had big news. I don't normally tune into a T-Mobile event. I don't follow the wireless industry that closely, but I had just attended the Verizon analyst event, and I thought, oh, I'm a wireless professional now. Let's see what they have to say. And boom, T-Mobile decides to get into the UCAS game, and I was not expecting that. I think it's a pretty big news, and they're doing it through a partnership through Dialpad. So Dialpad is effectively joining the elite club of UCAS companies that have managed to partner with a U.S. wireless carrier. You got RingCentral working with AT&T. You've got Cisco working with Verizon. You actually had 2600 Hertz was working with Sprint pre-merger, and now we've got Dialpad working with the new T-Mobile. Let's see here. So I think this elevates Dialpad dramatically. Dialpad has been on a rocket ship, lately. It just did its acquisition of High-Five late last year. It got valued at $1.2 billion in this last fundraising. So Dialpad seems to be doing really well. I think it's a big news for T-Mobile, and it really appears pretty clear that T-Mobile is out to disrupt not only the UCAS space, but the 5G space. They're pretty proud of their 5G network. I don't think they can go very long without mentioning 5G. But the point is that they're coming in at $37 enterprise plan, $37 per user per month, which includes 4G and 5G wireless services, unlimited, and the Dialpad service. And the Dialpad service includes the Uber Conference Pro service, and of course all the integrations and that Dialpad VI, which comes back from the TalkIQ acquisition. So a lot going on there, and then as a bonus, they kind of mentioned toward the end, oh, and by the way, we made a multi-million-dollar equity investment into Dialpad. So that was T-Mobile Ventures. I really like it when the ventures groups of these companies. I know RingCentral's got a ventures group. In fact, RingCentral's recent acquisition of what was it called? deep something. That was a T-Mobile. That was a Ring Central venture graduate. I know Cisco does that sometimes. They invest in companies and they end up. It's a nice way of not quite acquiring a company, but kind of guiding their technology to be more compatible and seeing how it works. And I think that's what's going on here with T-Mobile and Dialpad. So all around win for everybody. I think we're going to see some better pricing, and I would think we're going to be hearing a lot more about this service.
Yeah, I think it's a great deal for Dialpad. It's structured. I don't know how it's structured, but it's similar to the Ring Voda deal that Ring announced, I guess, earlier this year. And I kind of wonder if that venture financing too wasn't a bit of a prepayment, kind of like what Ring does with its partners, to sort of kickstart the relationship, and then they get paid back through the subs. And I think this is huge potential for Dialpad and T-Mo. I really do like T-Mo. They do position themselves as the end carrier, and I was looking at some NPS scores. Their NPS score is 35, and I think Cisco's is 38. So it's in that range where if you compare it to the Verizon, who's 7, and AT&T is 15, this could act as a catalyst to see a bit of a change into the guard, right? The more we go wireless, and companies are now looking at even building wireless WANs, I think T-Mo's 5G footprint actually would work pretty well for them. So I'm a big fan of enterprise 5G. I've written quite a bit on that. I think that's coming, and it's coming pretty fast. I don't think businesses will trust the kind of crappy historical service you get from Verizon and AT&T, but they might with T-Mo. So I think they're the one U.S. operator that's got a chance of disrupting there. So I do believe if you think of kind of security and net 5G and UCaaS, all the stuff's kind of coming together. And it's a great position for T-Mo to be in, and it's great for Dialpad to be associated with that.
So the last topic I think we should cover in this episode of Real Time Recorded is the Twilio Syniverse news. Syniverse is not a word that we talk very often about. I often think about Cinnabon more often than I think of Syniverse, actually. But this is actually a really interesting deal. Twilio intends to make a $750 million minority investment into Syniverse. And if you're not familiar with Syniverse, it's a leading IP packet exchange provider. Twilio is probably Syniverse's largest customer as it is. They have a service called the SMS aggregator, so it's probably the largest customer of SMS aggregator. And so Twilio is now becoming an owner of that, they locked into a discounted plan for SMS, which will improve their margins. And most importantly, this is going to give Twilio a little more trust, because a lot of carriers don't particularly trust Twilio because they're competitors. But all the carriers trust Syniverse, and so it's going to be. I think Twilio is hoping some of that trust rubs off on them, and of course Twilio will get access to some of the global routes that it needs to accommodate its expansion. So, pretty interesting deal. How does Twilio get their money back out of this investment besides those benefits I mentioned? Seems to be some belief that Syniverse will have some sort of exit in the near, in the not too distant future, probably an IPO or more likely a SPAC. And so they'll get their money back. They'll get the better rates. They get the trust. It seems to be a pretty shrewd deal. And Twilio is really, popping up more in my radar than it has in the past. They just did that $3.2 billion acquisition of Segment. They're getting some good traction in the contact center space. So a lot of good stuff coming out of a lot of good stuff happens when you ask your developer.
Yeah, and I think that this certainly helps them with their mobile strategy, especially when it comes to dealing with the mobile operators. As you mentioned, I think the level of trust there was somewhat, So, but now they can go through Syniverse. I think Twilio is kind of an interesting spot. I think they and AWS often sneak up on some of the traditional vendors because they do take more of a platform approach. We've talked about this on real-time recorders before, where this market is changing, and you're starting to see more apps have these features built into them versus running it standalone, right? And so I do think this is a company that still has its best days ahead of it. Twilio, and it's going to be interesting to see how, even with Amazon, when I talked to Eron Kelly about their GM there about Chime and what they're trying to do with Connect. They're not really trying to compete with the traditional UCAS, CCAS vendors. They're trying to backdoor by going through developer. And Twilio's had a lot of success doing that. So this is just another angle for them to do that.
Well, that wraps up this episode. Week 9, is it? We said week 9 of Real Time Recorded. Sorry we missed last week, but hey, even we take a week off every once in a while.
Yeah, well, Dave was busy looking for a Zang shirt. So
yeah, I had to find my Zang shirt. Very good. So we'll be back soon.